Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining us tonight. We are excited to have another candidate forum this evening and introduce you to one of the candidates running for New York's 12th congressional district. NY12 includes most of Manhattan, Queens, and Brooklyn along the East River. So we're excited that we have many parents and residents joining us to learn more about what does Congress do for us in New York City and meeting the challenger for that seat. Right now, many of us in New York are feeling unsettled by what is occurring, uncertain about what the future brings. Each day is a new unknown and many more questions. Some families and residents are asking, when will I go back to work? Will I go back to work? What are our kids going to do this summer? What will happen with schools? Will we have schools opening? And whether we should stay in the city at all. At the same time, so many of us who love New York City are hopeful that while life will be different, it can get better. New Yorkers for Safer Streets was formed in October of 2019 out of concern for the diminishing quality of life in the city and the increase in crime. Our mission is to meet with elected officials to discuss meaningful and innovative changes to make New York City a more livable city for families and all residents. The pandemic has only made our resolve stronger and our concerns even more urgent. Looming budget cuts and dire financial forecasts increase our anxiety in New York City. Collectively, we wonder what our future looks like and how New York will fare in the coming months and years. Some have left, and many who love this city are finding themselves struggling with the trade-offs inherent in the decision to stay. So with that said, tonight we're really excited to bring to you one of the candidates running, like I said, for New York's 12th congressional district. We have Suraj Patel with us this evening. Welcome, Suraj.
Hi, thank you for having me, and thanks for hosting this forum. I'm really excited about it.
Great. Well, we're going to kick right off. We have questions from our audience panelists tonight, and we're going to keep this short and sweet because we know parents' time is very busy and valuable. So we want this, the purpose of this forum, everyone, is really just to make sure parents go in and they're educated when they're voting. You know, we hear from too many parents, I don't really know how Congress impacts my day-to-day life in the city. Does it matter if I vote? And we really want to change that. We want families to feel empowered to vote, not just I'm going to vote to make sure my kid has a sticker, but I'm walking into the polls and I know exactly who I want to vote for. So our goal as New Yorkers for Safer Streets is just to help educate you by letting you hear directly from the candidates and make your decision on who's best for you, your family, and your life in New York City. So with that said, we'll just kick right off. Suraj, tell us, why do you believe you're the challenger for the District 12 congressional seat? Tell us why you believe District 12 needs a new representative in Congress.
Well, thank you again for having me, and thank you everyone for joining this to learn about and be empowered to vote for change. I think everyone in this city knows right now that we're at a breaking point. We've been in a crisis for a long time. And this coronavirus crisis is just showing us, laying bare in front of our faces, how out of touch and ineffective our representation has been. Now, this isn't an abstract thing for me. My brother is an ER doctor here in New York City. He is my roommate. I am a lawyer. I went to Stanford University and Cambridge for a public policy degree in evidence-based policy. And I bring that up because for so long, we have had politicians in New York, machine politicians, who won't ask the tough questions, who don't want to step out of line, who don't want to criticize the mayor, and don't want to look at evidence before they make policy. It's a lot of virtue signaling, it's a lot of ideology, but it's not evidence. And I had coronavirus. I'm a survivor of coronavirus because I beat it about 8.5 weeks ago with my brother, who's an ER doctor. Like I said, we both had it because that was going to happen. We knew that, considering our lives and how much we interact with people. And in that moment, you know, we were sick for 7 or 8 days, and then were quarantined as we were recovering. And we decided, you know what? We're seeing how many New York families have the anxiety of not knowing when they're going to be able to go back to work, not knowing whether they've had coronavirus. At the same time, their leaders, their representatives, including Representative Maloney, was tweeting, you don't need tests. Don't go out and get tests. Just stay home. They were shaming you for your need for security and confidence in what's happening to you, rather than empowering you to go get tests because they're covering up for their own failures. So you ask what Congress does for you. Well, frankly, it hasn't done much for you for a long time. Every morning, I watch Governor Cuomo, and every day, I'm sure many of you do as well. And he was just railing yesterday on New York's federal congressional delegation to do more. New York has been left behind in the CARES Act. It's been left behind in the coronavirus crisis, in the federal response. And what good is seniority if it's completely ineffective and out of touch with the problems that real New Yorkers face? It is terrifying to me that our police budget, our fire department budget, our education budget are all about to be cut across the board by 20% because our representatives do not have the effectiveness they need to bring federal dollars back to New York. And now for 3 decades, on average, for every dollar New York has sent to Washington, it's received 68 cents back. 68 cents as a state, significantly less as a city. So you wonder why we pay an inordinate amount of taxes and we don't receive the level of social services, benefits, and infrastructure we need. You look no further than your congressional representative who's been complicit in the failed status quo for so long. I embody a different type of representative, a different type of change. I'm a first-generation immigrant. My family moved here from India. Like so many other families in New York, we started a small business. My parents ran a bodega in New Jersey. My dad was an MTA engineer. And we grew up basically working in our family's businesses, bussing tables, filling vending machines, and being able to live the American dream because of those 3 very important things that are broken: education, opportunity, and upward mobility. I'm running to restore them.
Wonderful. Thank you. We're going to get into education a little bit further as we get into the conversation. Let's talk about, you mentioned education, opportunity, and upward mobility. Are those your top 3 priorities? And can you be more specific, if elected, what your top 3 priorities are and what you would do first if elected?
So my top priority is fighting for New York's fair share. Like I said, for so many years, New York has been paying for federal budgets, paying for money to go to Texas for bridges and Louisiana for roads, and yet our MTA is honestly decrepit. Our subway system, our infrastructure, our public housing, all of these things have been neglected for decades, and no one has been asking the tough questions, like I said, auditing and finding out where the waste is and what needs to be done to actually make this city livable and running the way that most of us New Yorkers want. So that's first and foremost, is fighting for New York's fair share and getting more effective, energetic, fighting representation. At the same time, the priorities of the representative should be aligned with families first. Families, not corporations. So I'm going to fight for families. I don't take money from corporations. And our first policy we launched this year was called a Family Opportunity Guarantee. And it received national attention from many, many corners. And that opportunity guarantee consists of 5 parts: paid family and medical leave for all people, universal nationwide pre-K. We have it in New York, but we should have it nationwide. A public option for childcare. Many of you know that childcare is more expensive than college tuition in our city and in most states in the country. Medicare for kids, for those kids that are left out of healthcare. Healthcare is a child's right. Childcare is a child's right. And why we're looking at these policies, and the last part, a universal child allowance, which would pay every family $500 a month per child up to age 5, and then $350 a month after that. Now, those numbers weren't chosen arbitrarily. I told you, I'm an evidence-based policymaker, and we have evidence from Canada and from 27 other industrialized countries that a child allowance like this would eradicate child poverty in America. It would halve it in the first year alone, and it wouldn't cost any more than we already spend on the patchwork programs we have for families with kids, like the child tax credit, the EITC for kids, and others. So add it all together, we are going to fight for families, not corporations, and we're going to fight for New York's fair share. And on that, I will add, by the way, you were just hit, rather than with support, a massive tax increase in this district because the SALT deduction was repealed. And that was a punitive bill aimed at blue state Democrats. And several times, our congressional delegation has had the opportunity to exert leverage to remove that repeal, and they haven't done it. So the question is, what good, again, is seniority if you're not willing to wield it, if you're not willing to make the tough stands you need to fight for your constituents?
Thank you. I mean, I think that's extremely helpful, and something that we're definitely is in the decision to stay is taxes and the ability to pay and continue to live in this city, and is it livable enough to be worth it?
I don't want you to leave. Let me just say, this city is built on families, and no one should have to decide to live in the city they love or whether they can have a family. And so the city needs to be made more affordable, and it needs to be made more fair. And I'm going to add one more thing. This crisis especially has really shown you what leadership could look like. I've been out on the streets every day. I have personally delivered thousands of meals to seniors in need via the City Meals program. I've been in housing. I've been in buildings. I've been dropping food and supplies off. My team has made 100,000 check-in calls to folks in our district to see if they need anything. And at a moment's notice, many times we have dropped off toilet paper, food, milk, water, any of those things. And one thing I have personally been doing as a person who's run a small business in the past is talking to the small businesses in our district. We've been featuring them on our Facebook and our Instagram. We've been trying to get them business. What I don't want to see is the character of our city and our neighborhoods be lost, because we've already seen for decades more and more storefront vacancies, more and more spots on our streets that are not lit at night because of those vacancies. It all goes hand in hand. Livability of the city is reliant on its workers, its small businesses, and its families. And again, for so long, they've been neglected for the powerful, for the wealthy, for the donor class, for the connected, and for the corporations, and they have left us out. With the small business thing, though, prior to this already, we had seen our streets with vacant storefronts and more sort of major national corporate tenants like Chase and Dwayne Reed and whatever, and the character of our neighbors is already going. I'm willing to fight for the New York that makes it unique, that makes it why we live here, why we love being here. So this crisis, after this crisis, we're definitely going to be needing to come up with support for our small businesses.
That's great. I was actually just by your office last weekend doing our first takeout at the Immigrant, a local, Jason, who's the owner there, is a longtime friend of my old neighborhood. And then we went to Kanayama around the corner and grabbed some sushi. The gentleman who owns that, he comes out and greets you when you come by. I haven't been there in 15 years. And we introduced my kids to him. And, I think what you said is what's really important, going back to the East Village and showing my kids where my husband and I started our life together and our family, and showing them our old apartment. It's an important thing. And I think that we talk to the small businesses too, and we're very concerned. They're very concerned. I know Jason said he thinks it'll be a year before he can get people back in his little teeny wine bar. And some of these places are small in the East Village and rents are really high. So, I think one of the questions we had was, a lot of small businesses are coming to us and their parents, and they said, we don't know if we're going to be able to stay. We've been on tons of calls. We're not getting loans. If I do get a loan, it's a payback. There's a lot of confusion. And we know that small businesses make our neighborhoods safer too. When we have storefronts that are open and not shut down, they make us feel safer. They're vibrant. They make the city feel better. How do we really prevent these small businesses from closing? And what more can be done in Washington that's not being done now to help small businesses stay and flourish?
So, I'm so glad you asked that, because that's something that we've been hyper-focused on this campaign. Good news, first off, is that we've been, today the Congress just voted to amend the Paycheck Protection Program to take the onus requirements of using 80% of the program for payrolls and having full employment by June 30th in order for that program to become a grant. They extended the deadline on it and it provided more flexibility. It's something we called for from day one as a person, like I said, who has run a small business, whose family still runs one, I was acutely aware of the struggles that we are going through. Look, we're on the first mile of a marathon. This isn't like, oh, let's open back up, now you're on your own. I'm not going to allow that to happen. This is going to require sustained long-term support. Long after these politicians and their reelections are assured, we have to actually fight for these folks all the way through. We're going to need rent relief. We're going to need mortgage relief. We're going to need regulations relief. We're going to need sales tax relief. There's so many things that it's going to require to keep sustain these businesses through the virus. I live in the East Village. I know it's exactly the places you're talking about. I love going to Kanoyama. I love going to the Immigrant, and those places are just not equipped for social distancing. And so even when the economy, quote unquote, reopens, they'll never be able to reopen and sustain. Now, you already know that restaurants run on razor thin margins. And if they can't cram people in on Saturdays and Sundays and Fridays, then there's no way that you're going to be able to sustain the levels of rent and taxation that they had before. And I don't see anybody in New York politics talking about that hard discussion, what it's going to take in terms of money, time, and effort to sustain these folks. And that's something that I will aim to do. Some of this, like concrete plans that we talked about, like wage subsidies, and having the government and the Federal Reserve pick up wages the way that they did in Denmark and the UK, rather than putting people onto unemployment, losing their insurance. I wish we did that. I wish we had more evidence-based policymakers in office in Washington, but so far we don't. And so we're dealing, what we're seeing right now is, Nicole, a set of 20th century politicians trying to tackle a 21st century problem. You've got people in office that weren't even part of the internet or cell phone revolution because they were surrounded by staff in office. So this is going to be a different type of crisis that requires a different type of response and a different type of representative. And I totally agree with you, to your point about how important it is for streets to be busy and full of people, so that they're safe. There was a famous Supreme Court justice quote that was like that there is no better disinfectant than sunlight. There's no better police officer than a street light. And I completely agree with both of those things. I'm running against somebody who takes more corporate PAC money, $9 million over the last decade alone from the financial services industry, and then goes to Washington behind closed doors and in markups and hearings and delivers goods and return on investment for those institutions. That is what I mean by there's no better disinfectant than sunlight. We have to shine a light on this stuff. Someone has to hold these people accountable. They cannot get away with it forever, because we'll continue losing the character of our city. And then the other side of this is the same thing. We need street lights. And by street lights, I mean we need our small businesses. The city cannot have storefront vacancies at the levels it does and remain safe and vibrant. It's crazy to me that we're in a very unique district. We're in a district that encompasses the Upper East Side all the way to the Lower East Side. Greenpoint, Williamsburg, Long Island City, and Astoria. One of my favorite places in this district to campaign in is Astoria, because it is so vibrant. It is so full of families, business selling, and it looked an image of New York City from a day when people are out and commerce was happening, and it's welcomed people from all over the world. And why can't we have that again in Manhattan? We have that here in New York City everywhere, because we have the density, and it's just a question of
Thank you. So let's go back to something you said earlier. Let's talk about evidence-based policymaking. I hear that term a lot. Can you give us some examples of how this could be leveraged to benefit New York City?
Absolutely. So first, let's distinguish two schools of public policy thought: evidence-based policymaking versus ideological policymaking. One involves just picking positions based on what the group does and then saying that's correct. The other looks at statistics, evidence, and results, and constantly refines policymaking. The representative from our district was a leading anti-vaccine advocate on Capitol Hill for 15 years. Representative Maloney introduced 9 different anti-vaccine bills. She may try to hide her record. She has scrubbed it from her website. We have all of the backup evidence from archived websites and things like that, press releases. We have photos where she's been campaigning, at rallies, speaking on anti-vax rallies, inviting conspiracy theorists to Capitol Hill, congratulating them. Those things are terrifying to me because it's just evidence of bad judgment when it comes to evidence-based policymaking. The science on vaccines and the debunked link to autism has been clear for decades, and in fact proven to be fraudulent and a money-making scheme for the people who perpetrated it. Now, these very same people are now mobilizing mobilizing against the deployment and development of an coronavirus vaccine. And those people are emboldened, empowered. They would not be there but for the congressional hearing Representative Maloney and her anti-science allies, primarily Republicans and conspiracy theorists, held on the House floor. So when it comes to science, the representative has just been wrong. And I think that's a big contrast with me. But I also want to address your question. So let's take evidence-based policymaking in a way that could help the city. Let's take small business, for example, right? And we have evidence that negative property tax and vacancy taxes in Seattle and other places can refill storefront vacancies pretty immediately. It's something no one wants to do because they don't want to go up against the real estate. A few very vocal real estate landlords that want to hold their places vacant for a triple net lease tenant like Starbucks or Dwayne Reed or whatever. For those of you, I'm sure many of you guys that are out there listening are in finance and stuff. If you have a rateable lease, you can sell it today and take the lump sum cash for the next 14 years. The only way to get a rateable lease is if you have a bond rating, like if you're Starbucks or Dwayne Reed. If you're wondering why so many storefronts are vacant in some of the busiest parts of our city, it's because everyone is holding off to find a client or a tenant that's rateable. Well, the Immigrant is not a rateable lease. Takahashi or Kanayama Sushi is not a rateable lease. Tompkins Square Bagels is not a rateable lease. Starbucks is. So our playing field has been tilted towards that. And yet again, I think I can point to a long chain of events that get you there. But because big corporations and lobbyists have policy that they get to make and the rest of us don't have advocates, that's why you get those results.
Great, thank you. That's very helpful. And let's switch on the next topic. So, issue of federal money coming to the states is a hot topic. Everyone's talking about it. New York State and city leaders say loudly they need it to recover, rebuild. Republicans are saying they won't bail out blue states. You alluded to that earlier, that we need to exert, that people who are representing us should be exerting their leverage and maybe aren't to the full extent. If elected, how would you be going about securing the resources New York needs to recover, and how will you?
Very good question, Nicole. I'm really glad you asked that too, because it's something that we get asked a lot on this race, which is that the representative knows how Washington works. And I think knowing how something works in a broken system probably isn't necessarily a strength. We're seeing a full-scale failure of our delegation and of our government in response to a pandemic that was predicted. Whenever people say no one could have predicted this happen, like, that's not true. Evidence-based policymakers have seen for decades that this was a possibility. We didn't prepare for it. We're caught off guard. And when that kind of thing happens, seniority should be the first thing that goes, right? When a company fails so dramatically, who should go first? Those of us that are working, or those are the ones who made the decisions. So first things first, I think you can't really, put out a house that's on fire from the inside. You're going to need new people to do it with new ideas and new perspectives. And that's me. But I would fight for New York by actually fighting for New York. I would actually say, do you want, the House of Representatives is controlled by Democrats. It is a co-equal part of the United States Congress, which is controlled by Senate Republicans on the Senate side and House Democrats on the House side. And then they've got the president who wants crazy ideas like the Space Force to come into fruition. Now, every year, the federal Congress and the federal government passes a budget. And that is where our values are. Joe Biden, who I worked for, was one of my first bosses. I actually worked for President Obama's campaign in 2008. And Joe Biden used to say, don't tell me your morals, show me your budget. Don't tell me your values, show me your budget. And I think it's very, very telling to see that our budgets never fall in line with the things that Representative Maloney and others say. And I'm tired of press release and messaging documents, ribbon cuttings and grandstanding. I want results. So I would say for federal budget, if the president wanted a Space Force, if the Senate Republicans wanted a bailout for the airlines, then we wanted support for New York. And it should have been a line in the sand, drawn and crossed, or never crossed. If you want the airlines to be rescued, if you want Goldman Sachs to be rescued, if you want these things, then you're going to have to also support New York. And it seems that we get rolled over and over and over in Washington, D.C. because we don't exert the leverage, because there's so much get along and go along that happens. And I'm just tired of it. I'm frankly tired of it.
Thanks. I think, and this next question kind of goes right along in with that, in hand with that. What, we talked a little bit about helping out the small businesses, working to restart, and help them stay in business. Let's talk a little bit about what you propose to help shore up, restart New York City's economy, create more New York City generated revenue. And the question came, it was thinking more about innovation, investment, infrastructure. What do you propose that will help New York City not just recover, but come out stronger?
So I think New York City has as a person, who's running a business, there's one thing you cannot substitute for, which is amazing workforce. We have the most dynamic, diverse, talented workforce in the world. And therefore, we will always be the most attractive place to come to in the world. People have been saying New York is done, written its obituary every few years in its 400-year history. And yet, New York never dies because countries, people who don't wait their turn, people who are bold, people who are aspirational and ambitious. And that's the thing we have going for us. So if we're going to rescue New York, or if we're going to bring out a new New York that's bigger, bolder, and better than the past, than the one prior to coronavirus, we have to empower our workforce to thrive. And that means a bunch of different things, right? Better infrastructure, an actual plan to support businesses and small businesses and help them grow. Sometimes regulation and rent relief. I think we are overburdened by regulations in this city sometimes. And you can ask any small business owner about that. Probably sales tax relief coming out of this thing, because we're going to need it. Now, let me talk about this with relation. I'm not going to be able to wave a magic wand, and I'm not running for mayor of New York, but I am running for U.S. Congress. And I think you ought to have a representative who actually cares about these problems. So in Congress, the relevant committee, Housing, Transportation, and Infrastructure, is the committee that would help fund NYCHA, would help fund the MTA. Do you know how many people in New York City's congressional delegation sit on that committee? 0. If your priorities aren't in the right place, if you don't care about the issues the rest of us care about, then how are you going to do anything about them? So that is a committee that I would like to sit on. I'd like to bring money back for our public housing, and to bring money back for our MTA. And I'd like to bring money back to build this crumbling infrastructure. And now let's take the MTA for a single example. For so many years, we've been run as a single party city. Nobody wants to ask the tough questions. Nobody wants to audit, and everyone gets along and goes along. Because of that, the Second Avenue subway line cost $1.6 billion a kilometer to build. And it was 97 years late. I know Representative Maloney tends to tout that as her biggest accomplishment, but if that was my biggest accomplishment, 97 years late and at a cost that was 6 times higher than the next closest subway line in the world, which was in Paris, which Paris has stronger environmental and labor regulations than we do. So there can't even be that excuse. Then someone needs to answer tough questions before we ask more New Yorkers for their hard-earned tax dollars, where and how are you spending them and not providing the level of services we deserve? And I'm willing to do that because I don't come from the machine. We're not beholden to it. I didn't, quote unquote, wait my turn because I am New York through and through. And I think you deserve a representative like that.
Thanks. I actually had to mute myself to holler at my kids to please be quiet, not kill me while I'm on this call. So homeschool life is getting quite difficult for us after, how long have we been at this? A long time. So hopefully they'll give us a little more time.
I think we're at week 8.
Yeah, it feels like a lifetime. So from Kim, she asked something along those lines, and I think you touched on most of it, but I'm going to ask her question as she wrote it. And if there's anything else to add, please do. Kim asks, New York's contribution to the federal tax base was $254 billion. As one of the oldest habitable locations in the United States, we suffer from crumbling infrastructure, affordable housing, and transit. For this reason, our essential workers, the people who have been taking care of us during COVID-19, can't afford to live or even commute here. What's your strategy to change this? So I think you talked about sitting on the public housing committees and things that can really help bring change. I know we get a lot of funding federally to the public housing system, but it doesn't seem like many people feel there's been enough change. Our transit system is clearly not in the best shape. So do you have anything to respond to Kim's question regarding the strategy to change that?
Yeah, Kim. So I think some of what I just talked about, which is, I think it's great that you asked a question that I've already sort of mentioned, which is the massive imbalance in what Congress is delivering for New York versus what New York is delivering for Congress. So that balance needs to be shifted. And I know I'm not naive. You know, I'm not as young as I look. I'm 36. I've seen a few moons. And I know I'm not that naive. And I know that it's not just going to be like, oh, new guys showed up here and let's give New York more money. But I think we have different new plans that we have to offer up. So a couple years ago we wrote a medium on breaking up the MTA. And what we meant by that was, sure, we have to go and make the argument to the federal government that the most dynamic economic region in the country, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Long Island, cannot be left to crumbling infrastructure and transit that is bogging down our own tax-based innovation and economy. And we acknowledge that our old, stale bureaucracies have failed us, like the MTA, like the New York City Housing Authority. And because of that, we're here to ask for federal funding and offer the federal government board seats on the MTA, board seats on the New York City Housing Authority, or to sort of, we call it breaking up MTA by producing a new organization with new board seats. Because I understand that you want to be good stewards of our tax dollars too. Perhaps we do need some adults in the room, another third party here, to support New York City's sort of crumbling infrastructure due to their stale bureaucracies. I can't hear you. You're muted.
Muted myself in case the kids were yelling. I psyched myself. I'll start over. So a question came in from Eric. Did you support Amazon headquarters coming to New York City? What would be your ideal use of the site for the now defunct project?
Hey, Eric, great question. So I serve as a visiting fellow at Century Foundation, which is a progressive democratic think tank run by a former Obama policy official, head of domestic policy. And during the time that Amazon happened, I actually wrote a piece for that. So one thing I will certainly do, Nicole, is share you that piece, which is about 6-7 pages, because I believe in nuance, and I think that issues like this are nuanced. And that way you can at least see what I'd said then, and not one of these things where politicians say things and after the fact. I'll say this. It is your job and responsibility as a trustee and a representative to make sure that if 25,000 jobs are coming to your district, that you should try and figure out a way to make it work. I had a lot of problems with the lack of transparency, the lack of community input, and the subsidies in that deal, and the way the governor and the mayor sort of just foisted it upon our communities in Long Island City. At the same time, I think that the silence in the face of the political whirlwind and firestorm at the time from the representative herself, for example, speaks volumes. It speaks to somebody who's been elected to office 13 straight times. Because if you're consistently on both sides of every issue with your finger in the wind, you will survive 3 decades in office. I don't think that's the kind of representative you need, first off. So lamenting an outcome you could have prevented after the fact isn't leadership. I think I would have fought tooth and nail to make sure that high-paying jobs came to this city, that the people and residents of Queensbridge who are wholly supportive or largely supportive of it could have gotten maximum benefits, STEM education, and job preference guarantees, local source preferencing, union construction contracts, all those things, and eliminated those subsidies. But you know what I would have been? I would have been at the table, would have been absent in the face of a firestorm. And I would have tried to make the deal better. So now we're sitting in a situation in which we're going to rue the day that those tax dollars are gone, given that we're about to face a post-pandemic, probably major recession, maybe the most major we've seen in a century. And so I think that we now have to take a look at what can we do to salvage how much economic output we can get from that area. I would love for that to be a major community-led project with mixed-use housing, affordable housing, retail, residential, and commercial property, to be able to make this, and obviously parks and schools. One of the things, by the way, that I don't know how many of the folks on this group are from Queens, Long Island City. Long Island City shouldn't have to beg for schools to be built when developers build this much housing and the city approves it. No one should have to do that. Kids from LIC are bused to Sunnyside to go to school because they're overflowing. That's unacceptable. And I thought what was so annoying to me about the Amazon debacle was that you've got people asking, this company's coming in to build politicians asking them to build schools and subway stops and things to cover up for their own failures for decades of not providing enough infrastructure and transportation and schooling. So, I don't think that anyone comes out clean from that debate, from the Amazon debate at all. And certainly not the least Amazon, which, by the way, doesn't need subsidies, shouldn't need subsidies. And New York leaders should have flexed their muscle. We have what Amazon wanted, the best workforce in the world. We should have used that to say, if you want to come here, you get no tax subsidies, absolutely not. But you are welcome to bring jobs here and to be part of our community and to be good stewards. And they didn't do that either. So I'm not really satisfied with much of any of the players in that.
Thank you. Speaking of families and schools, it's another hot topic, and we received a lot of questions from families who are struggling with the decision to stay or leave the city. Two of the things that really impact that are what's going to happen to schools, and is it going to be safe in New York City? Many people are going to be out of a job. We had Gail Brewer on last night, and she said some people are going to be desperate. What proposals do you have that focus on these topics that will benefit the city, keeping the public safe, making sure people have money, food, and making sure we can get back to school?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, everything is obviously scary and in question right now, and the anxiety is palpable in New York about when we'll return to quote unquote normal? And was that normal even an acceptable amount of normal? And I think the answer is absolutely not. We live in a city, in a district particularly, that is extremely unequal. It's extremely segregated. And the issues that bind us all are the same. Getting your kid a quality education, being able to walk safely on the streets, regardless of the color of your skin, and being able to leave a better life for your kids because you and everyone else has opportunity, upward mobility. And we're right back to the three things we started with: education, opportunity, and mobility. Those are the things that bind us. These shouldn't be us versus them type of discussions. And so my plans for what comes out of this is a sustained, it's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of determination. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be a 2-year project. It's certainly not going to be the right press release or the ribbon cutting. It's going to be rolling up your sleeves and being in the community and doing the work and then fighting like hell in Washington, D.C. for New York's fair share. Everyone's going to need support. Small businesses are going to need support. Renters are going to need support. I know this is not politically popular, but landlords probably going to need support because they have mortgages to pay. This is no one's fault. There is no moral hazard when it comes to a pandemic. We didn't choose this one. So, I'm empathetic to the struggles of everyone because we're all going through them too.
Thank you. So let's talk about mental illness. This is something that our group cares very much about. We've seen an increase in the amount of mentally ill on the streets. Even my walk of the East Village last week, I encountered 3 very mentally ill people, individuals who weren't bothering anybody, but were in serious pain and had taken up shop at Copper Still's now empty storefront. From Patrick, he asked, on your website you state, nationally, 1/3 of homeless people are seriously mentally ill, often untreated and unable to care for themselves. What role does involuntary treatment and commitment play in ensuring they receive the treatment they need?
So we talk a lot about assisted outpatient treatment, which, is a key tool because especially when we're talking about this in relation to homelessness crisis. Now, let me just, by the way, I want to zoom out for a hot sec on the homelessness crisis because it is actually, a misnomer to say that all homelessness is derived from mental health. The biggest driver of homelessness is high rent. Domestic abuse is a massive driver of homelessness. And so there's a lot of different things that play into this. I don't want to just conflate the two things. Homelessness is a symptom. It's not a cause. And it's a symptom of a lot of different types of issues. So I just want to make sure that that's clear. But regarding mental health, assisted outpatient treatment is a really useful tool in combating mental deterioration of individuals in psychiatric crisis. I think that is a court-ordered outpatient treatment for those who refuse to consistently comply with mental guidance. But studies have shown that AOT does reduce the incidence and duration of hospitalization, homelessness, arrest, and incarceration. So I think that's a tool in the toolkit here to answer your question that we're supportive of.
Thanks. And that is a serious distinction. When we testified before a joint committee of states and the on the budget before COVID, we actually testified about raising more awareness to Kendra's law, as well as teaching the judicial system how to actually implement assisted outpatient treatment, AOT, to help mentally ill versus incarcerating them, which is what happens to many of them. You talked about the homeless, so let's talk about that. I know in my neighborhood, one of the hotels has now housing many of the guys from John Doe Fund. I walk over there, John Doe. I walk over there and walk by, and they're nice. They're not bad neighbors to have. And I think, but one of the things we've been hearing about recently and had a lot of questions on is I think Councilmember Kalos came out and said we're paying a middleman in Austin, Texas, and we've been paying an exorbitant amount in dollars to to actually house them that didn't need to be spent if we just worked out contracts with the hotels themselves. I know a lot of people in the hotel industry are jobless and would probably value having a job where they could help with contracting and things like that. What would you do if you were in Congress, or how would you assist with that, avoiding our taxpayer dollars kind of going to waste for things that are unnecessary and could have created jobs versus paying a middle company that we may not have needed?
I don't think a lot of people are doing a lot of critical thinking in Congress right now and in policymaking, and I think that just applies across the board, including something like you described. Now, I'm admittedly I'm not super familiar at all with whatever middleman he's talking about, but I'll say this: this is a band-aid solution. We've forever advocated for permanent supportive housing. Baltimore did it, ended homelessness, and we need a nationwide plan on this with the highest levels of homelessness since the Great Depression. And now it's a public health issue. It always was as well with coronavirus. So there is no alternative to actually coming up with a solution like permanent supportive housing for folks who are homeless. And it can't just be that we play this whack-a-mole strategy where we use one hotel, do another. People need jobs. People need access to opportunity and education. It's that simple. And frankly, hotels don't provide that. They're not built for that. That's not the idea. And you got to be really stupid to give a hotel 100% occupancy rates for the next 10 years rather than just build your own permanent supportive housing. I mean, that's just dumb business sense. And I guess that's because none of these people have ever run one.
Thanks. So we've been on for almost an hour. I know parents are still holding on, but I wanted to kind of end on this note. Share with us, with families, parents out there, how you are the best candidate to represent families in New York City as in Congress.
Everything I do, everything I think is grounded in what is the biggest asset I've ever had in my life, which is an extremely close, multi-generational, multilingual, extended family that I grew up with. My grandmother left India with my parents in the late 60s and early 70s. And they came here with almost absolutely nothing. And, I think about them at the 7 p.m. sort of pot banging, thing we do because, while my brother is an ER doctor in the city and that's who we're clapping for, we're also clapping for them. They ran a bodega. They delivered pizza. They were security guards. We fit 3 generations of us in an apartment, 1-bedroom apartment above the bodega we were running. Some of my first memories are of sleeping in a line on the ground in this living room and then to the bedroom with everyone in there. And my aunts and uncles were going to college, community college. Everyone was working. I'd go to school in the morning. My dad would come home at night, in the morning after working overnight shifts for the MTA. And, some of the things that I think about growing up, bussing tables and filling vending machines and working with them, this is a family enterprise. Everything we do, I live with my brother still, 2 of them. One of them works on my campaign with me. We're just so close. And so everything I think of is through that lens. I do want to give you an anecdote. One of the, first memories I have is when you ran a bodega like that in the 80s, you would sell just like anyone else the New York Times. And on Sunday mornings, the New York Times is very thick, as you all know. And it would come in separate sections. The New York Times would come in the front page, the sports section, the business section, and all that. If you opted for it that way, because you could wake up at 4:30 in the morning and piece that paper together one piece at a time into a cohesive single New York Times, and then you'd sell it. Or you could get it as collated, let's call it, or be at 5 in the morning Sundays and watching parents and my aunt and uncles and my grandmother. My great grandmother lived with us. She lived till 100 years old. And they would put the paper together to sell it. And um, I think real testament to the power of education, opportunity, and mobility, that the son of people who put the paper together one piece at a time to make 10 extra cents can be running for Congress in New York City as a Democrat and be written in print in that very same paper one generation later. It's everything to me. So I think I'd be the best candidate for families because I'm just a family person.
Thank you, Suraj Patel, for joining us tonight. And we look forward to learning about, as things progress, more about New York's 12th Congressional District. Suraj Patel, challenger for Congress. I hope everyone on the call found this very informative. Our one priority right now is families. We want you to vote. That's so important. We want you to go and feel empowered to vote. Your vote does matter, probably matters even more in the primaries sometime. So hopefully you found this informative. You got to know a little bit more about Suraj this evening. And I believe you have a website that they can go to if they want.
Yes, please. So there's a few things I'd like to share with you. This is the first election in New York that you can vote by mail for the first time because of coronavirus. And so we encourage you to go to www.votejune23.com. That is a website we made, which gives you a very easy 1, 2, 3 step guide to how to vote by mail and lets you go request your ballot. And I do want every one of you to vote. We do want families in this city to be attuned to what's going on in this city and be the ones that control who represents you. So please do. At the same time, please go to www.surajpatel.nyc. That's SurajPatel.nyc. Not a very typical political name. Would have been easier to have something like John Smith, so I didn't have to spell it out every time, but I hope it sticks instead. So please go to surajpatel.nyc, look me up. There's actually a great video about my family if you'd like to watch it. That's on there as well. And then please share widely, and frankly, please honor me with your vote in just 26 days.
All right. Thank you again so much, Suraj. It was great having you on tonight. And I think it was great for everyone to hear more about you as a candidate and where you stand on some of the different issues tonight. Hopefully everyone joining us found this informative. And again, we hope you'll vote and have a great evening. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much, Nicole. And thanks, Veronica, and everyone else. Talk soon.